Was your colleague Lucy Powell listening to the public when she said about grooming gangs that have appalled many people? She said it was a dog whistle when a reform activist expressed concern about it.
What I would say, and I've been in plenty of those debate formats myself, sometimes in the heat of the debate, you say something that comes across badly that you wish you hadn't said.
Does that look like she was listening to people who are terrified about that whole saga?
Well, Lucy's apologised for those comments, and it's right that she's apologised.
You want to blow that little trumpet? Let's get that dog whistle out. These were the actual words of Lucy Powell, Labour MP and leader of the House of Commons, when questioned about the industrial-scale sexual abuse of young girls by grooming gangs. In what world is demanding justice for thousands of abused children a dog whistle? Powell's shocking response reveals a disturbing attitude within the Labour establishment, one that seems more concerned with deflecting uncomfortable questions than protecting vulnerable victims. What she said next will leave you speechless. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favour. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So did you click the subscribe button? Great. Thank you so much. Now back to the video. The moment a politician dismisses the suffering of thousands reveals their true character. Lucy Powell's recent response wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment, it exposed a troubling pattern within the Labour establishment. When confronted by Monty about the Channel 4 documentary on rape gangs, Powell didn't engage with the substance. She didn't acknowledge the pain of victims. Instead, she reached for language that mocked the very question. Let's examine what actually happened.
Cabinet Minister Lucy Powell, she's under mounting pressure to resign from her role as leader of the House of Commons.
I don't know whether you saw the documentary on Channel 4 about rape gangs over
No,
this.
we want to blow that little trumpet now, do we? Yeah, okay.
There was a real issue.
Let's get that dog whistle out, shall we? Yeah.
It is understood that whilst Downing Street were initially angry with the comments being made, they have since accepted her apology, which she put out on social media straight away. An explanation.
I'd like to clarify that I regard the issue of child exploitation and grooming with the utmost seriousness. I'm sorry if that was unclear. I was challenging the political point scoring around it, not the issue itself.
During a media appearance, Monty questioned Powell about the Channel 4 documentary covering grooming gangs. Rather than addressing the serious issue at hand, Powell responded with, "You want to blow that little trumpet? Let's get that dog whistle out." This wasn't just an offhand remark, it was a calculated attempt to trivialise a question about one of the most serious scandals in modern British history. Consider the weight of what Powell dismissed. We're talking about the industrial-scale sexual abuse of young working-class girls across multiple cities in the UK. These aren't isolated incidents or exaggerated claims. These are documented cases involving thousands of victims, predominantly vulnerable white working-class girls, who were failed by the very institutions meant to protect them. Girls as young as 11 were drugged, raped and trafficked while authorities looked the other way for years. Powell's choice of words, blow that little trumpet and dog whistle.
Member of the cabinet.
Yeah, but she's also human, and I've made mistakes in the past. I'm sure I'm going to make mistakes in the future. She's mortified. And, she does not want and would not want. I think the point she was trying to make, and the point I would make, is on such a serious issue, the more we can take the heat of the politics out of this and get to the heart of the challenge, people who've campaigned on or been victims of these most appalling crimes, to think she was in any way trying to undermine those experiences or those arguments.
Reveals a concerning mindset. By characterising concerns about grooming gangs as mere dog whistles, she implied that raising these issues is somehow an act of bad faith. This framing doesn't just dismiss the question, it dismisses the experiences of every victim still waiting for justice. It suggests their suffering is a political talking point rather than a grave injustice that demands accountability. Robert Lowe MP recognised the severity of Powell's remarks. In his letter to Powell, he expressed deep concern over her comments, describing them as abhorrent and insulting. Lowe didn't mince words when he characterised the issue as a documented systemic failure of the state to protect vulnerable white girls. His letter urged Powell to issue a public apology for dismissing this tragedy with such flippant language. This isn't just about one insensitive comment. The broader context matters. For decades, authorities across the UK failed to protect thousands of girls from predatory grooming gangs. From Rotherham to Rochdale, Telford to Oxford, the pattern was consistent. Vulnerable girls were targeted, exploited and ignored. When victims came forward, they were often dismissed or even blamed for their own abuse. The scale of this failure is staggering, with estimates suggesting thousands of victims across dozens of towns and cities. What makes Powell's response particularly troubling is that it fits into a wider pattern. When confronted with the issue of grooming gangs, certain politicians consistently turn to deflection and minimisation. As Robert Genrich pointedly observed, "Wow, listen to this Labour's Lucy Powell thinks it's a dog whistle to demand arrest and accountability for the grooming gangs. What a disgusting betrayal of the victims they are part of the cover-up." This sentiment captures the frustration felt by many who see these dismissive responses as part of a larger problem. Why would senior political figures respond this way to questions about documented abuse? What motivates someone in Powell's position to reach for dismissive language rather than expressing empathy for victims? These questions point to something beyond individual failings. They suggest an institutional attitude, one that prioritizes political convenience over uncomfortable truths. Powell's comments represent more than just a personal error in judgment. They potentially indicate a wider institutional problem within the Labour establishment, a willingness to dismiss certain victims when acknowledging their suffering might prove politically inconvenient. This raises serious questions about whose interests these politicians truly serve. What should accountability look like for politicians who fail victims in this way? When those entrusted with power use that power to minimise the suffering of the most vulnerable, they betray the fundamental compact between the governed and those who govern. Public figures like Powell aren't just random individuals expressing opinions, they're representatives with significant influence over policy and public discourse. The victims of grooming gangs deserve better than to have their experiences dismissed as dog whistles. They deserve representatives who will acknowledge the full weight of what happened to them and commit to ensuring it never happens again. They deserve justice, not deflection. Most importantly, they deserve the basic dignity of having their suffering taken seriously by those in positions of power. As we consider Lucy Powell's shocking response, we must ask ourselves what kind of political culture tolerates such dismissive attitudes toward victims of systematic abuse. We must question whether those who minimise the suffering of thousands are fit to represent anyone at all, and we must demand a standard of public service that doesn't treat justice for abuse victims as an inconvenient political problem to be waved away with accusations of dog whistling. Lucy Powell's dismissal of grooming gang victims as mere dog whistling represents a profound moral failure that demands a response from the public. This isn't simply a case of poor word choice, it's symptomatic of a political establishment that prioritises avoiding uncomfortable conversations over protecting vulnerable children. When those in power minimise systemic abuse as Powell did, we cannot remain silent. True justice for thousands of abused children depends on our willingness to confront uncomfortable truths and reject those who would minimise their suffering. We must demand representatives who acknowledge these crimes for what they are. Not political inconveniences, but devastating injustices that deserve full recognition and accountability.